and welcome to the Flute 360 podcast, where we incorporate a panoramic view of flute-related topics. I am your host, Heidi K. Begay, and this is episode 51, Published Flutists with Mark Sparks. Today's episode is sponsored by J&K Productions. They produce all of my episodes, from adding the intro and outro music to editing the audio and all post-production needs. Contact them for your next podcast project at jkproductions.media. Welcome everyone to another Flute 360 podcast episode. Today we are talking with Mark Sparks, who is the author of his books, Orchestral Excerpt Practice Book, Volumes 1 and 2, and Exploring Sound, Tone Development Through Orchestral Repertoire, also Volumes 1 and 2. Welcome, Mark, to the show.
Thank you. It's nice to be with you.
How are you on this Wednesday afternoon?
Well, I'm just fine. I'm having a great day. We're having an exciting time here in St. Louis with St. Louis Symphony. We are between rehearsals right now with our new music director, Stefan Deneuve. So it's a very exciting time here.
Very exciting. Now, do you have time in your busy schedule for teaching, or is it just St. Louis Orchestra tour and performances and recording around the clock?
No, I actually have some time to myself, and I do have to spend a good deal of time preparing for other events. For example, I am teaching at DePaul University in Chicago, and so I'm running up there and back pretty constantly, and I have a recital coming up there on Monday. So, I'm working on that program, practicing that stuff, and a number of other projects. I'm doing some arranging, which I very much enjoy. And of course, wrangling these books and getting the distribution going and so on is taking a good deal of time these days. So no, it's not all orchestra.
You're very busy.
Pretty busy.
Yeah. I like to say that us musicians, we have to change hats quite a bit. For example, that's a great example. You're an orchestral player and then a teacher and then working as now an author and an arranger. It's quite time consuming.
Oh, but this is really, really fun.
Yes.
I love being involved with the music in so many different ways. Teaching is very inspiring and very exciting, and it's really educational for me to be able to try and put into words the things that I think and that I feel about the music and flute playing, and certainly getting into doing some arranging is very exciting for me because I'm so excited about all music. And, when I hear a piece that I like, I just want to get my flute and play it.
That's beautifully said. I remember a friend of mine, Dr. Scott Poole. He's a bassoonist. And I heard him play and give a concert in Italy a couple years ago. And when I heard it was bassoon and piano, I thought, oh my gosh, that's a beautiful piece. That would sound amazing on flute. Mm-hmm. And I talked to him about it, and he said, actually, he arranged it. It was a flute piece, and he arranged it for bassoon. So I can't think of the piece, and I didn't have to ask him, but I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess my thought was valid.
Yeah. Well, I started out looking at a copy of the Fauré Élégie for cello, and my wife is a cellist, so we have a good deal of her, and so it wasn't hard to get hold of a copy of it, and I had heard it on a concert or somebody played it here, maybe here in St. Louis. Anyway, I was taken again with the beauty of the piece, and I wondered if anyone had done an arrangement of it because, there are so many arrangements out there, especially of Fauré and Debussy and these composers for flute. And I thought, well, surely somebody has set this piece for flute and piano. It would be challenging, but it's so beautiful. Somebody has to have done this. I started poking around and I couldn't find anything. So I got in touch with Theodore Presser and I said, would you guys be interested in something like this? And they said, well, why don't you do it and send it to us and we'll go from there. So I did that one, and then I have a couple others, and then a couple others, and it's just fun to do. And I know that flute players are always looking for nice recital pieces and so on, and always looking to expand our repertoire. And, a lot of composers did either, arrange things themselves for other instruments, or advised others to arrange their works for other instruments. So I think it's legitimate as long as you use good judgment, trying to arrange things that you think really do sound good on flute, that are practical, that are approachable, and that people of different levels can play,
Yeah, I agree with that, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to, let's dive in and talk about your books.
Okay.
Okay, great. So how did the idea of your books come about?
Well, these projects have been brewing for a really long time, actually. And I think about a year and a half ago, I reached a point where I thought, if I don't write down what I know and try to communicate it to others, I'm now, I'm kind of afraid that I never will. And I think, the world is full of people who have a book in their heads, but never quite find the time to get it all down. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to have to start getting up earlier in the morning and try to get some of this down. So, these are just ideas that I've been working with for a long time in my own playing. They've developed throughout my career. I think the basis for writing these books is a creative approach towards playing. This idea, one needs to search for their own personal voice and really does end up doing things their own way, even after good education and, good examples to follow. I feel that the essence of being a musician, of being a flute player, is discovering your own personality, your own voice in the instrument. And that a lot of that work has to be done by you. Your teacher is at some point going to run out of material, kind of leave you there saying, well, did you practice it? Are you ready? This kind of thing. So that's sort of the basic approach. And it's not that I think that I feel strongly about that, about creativity and music. But also my teacher, Robert Willoughby, was very into encouraging his students' individuality. And I think he helped me along in my belief that creativity really is the essence of being a musician. And, some of this just has grown out of my own need to survive in the business. When I started out, I figured out that I had to not only discover my own sound, but that I had to figure out how I was going to have a career as a performer. And I loved orchestra. I wanted to do it always. And so I learned that I had to learn how to audition. And in doing that, I learned to work with recording myself and discovering what I want and what I sound like and all this kind of stuff. And then, of course, I very fortunate, and I was able to realize my dream and play in orchestra professionally, and then you're confronted with the idea that you have to keep growing, and you have to keep improving. And in professional orchestras, it's expected that you're really going to maintain your high level, and I found that I had to keep learning in order to do that. Also, there's this sort of idea that you have to keep performing the core repertoire at a very high level. And as we go through our careers, sometimes we find that the solutions we found for our challenges are not necessarily appropriate today. And we have to kind of come up with a new view and move on to the next thing. And so out of that, I think that's sort of where they come from. But there's other things. I mean, the teaching has taught me a lot. I've seen much good and not so good about excerpts and auditions. I've seen students struggle to find their tone over the years. Students struggle to find ways to practice that actually work for them. I did come to the realization that in our teaching, sometimes we do not find the time to teach some of the most important lessons. One of them being that if you want to succeed as a performer, you must find a way to work on the material that actually, makes you successful on stage. So the books partially grow out of that, especially the excerpt book series, 2 volumes presently. If I'm crazy enough, maybe I'll keep going. But trying to offer students and players more options, more ideas about how to practice things that might work for them.
I see. Thank you for that answer. There's a lot of things in there that you said that I greatly connect to and that make a lot of sense to me.
These are things that these are issues that we all have, from the beginning student all the way to a top player. We all have the same challenges with the instrument, and we all have that work challenge. How do you work efficiently, without getting burned out, without injury? And again, how do you find the effective way that you need to practice the material so that when you walk out on stage, you feel pretty good,
Yeah. I'm working on this French piece now, and there was a passage that I just could not get. And I took a step back and I said, okay, wait, Heidi, what would you tell a student? Like, literally, what would you do and how would you break it down for that student? And I just talked it through and I said, oh, okay, duh. And then I did it and I went through my own solution and I said, okay, that's really good advice. I'll have to remember that because it works. So I say that because you mentioned finding a solution. And we essentially, as teachers, we are helping or trying to get the student on this path where they can be their best own teacher, because they won't always have you in the room.
Yeah, I always tell my students my goal is for them to be able to get rid of me.
Yeah.
And it really is going to come down to that for all these young performers in school to realize their dreams. Sometimes I think something about the books also has been a process of self-discovery for me, because I remember there a couple times last year, I think I was practicing maybe this Eroica excerpt for a performance. And, I wanted to make sure that everything was stable and that, sounded good. And, I was practicing it in some different ways. And I thought, those ways of practicing that actually really work well for me. And, I wonder whether maybe I should try to sketch those out. Maybe somebody else would all that particular way of approaching it useful. So the excerpt books kind of grew out of that. There's this tone series, which I've published at the same time. There's 2 volumes of that as well. And I might add, just for clarity, each volume contains material related to one piece. So there are not multiple pieces in each book. Each book is about one piece. And I did find that in order to illustrate my ideas about alternative ways of practicing these passages, and then to include some material regarding context, putting a piano reduction, sketching out specific ideas for shaping and phrasing, which is so important, and then to flesh out maybe some more adventurous practice techniques. I did find that it took some pages, and I thought, well, if I try to do this for the core repertoire and I try to put it in one book, it's going to turn into a Bible. It's going to be 1,000 pages. So, so then I thought, well, I guess, people might object to it, but I think I'm to write a volume on each of these. Now, I am trying to limit the number of pages in these books because, if you've ever tried to, in detail, sketch out the way that you actually practice something, I would encourage everyone to try it. You will find that it's actually quite challenging to do.
Is it challenging because you hear it in your head and just dictating it and writing it out on manuscript paper? Or was there another side to that made it challenging?
Well, for example, I'm looking at this page in my excerpt book, volume 1, excerpt practice book. It's Beethoven's Eroica. And I'm just looking here at page 25. And this is just, these exercises, which are a fragmenting technique where 16th notes happens to occur at bar 192 in that excerpt from the last movement. And you can break up the basic arpeggio, what we often call partitioning, into fragments, and work on each fragment and then start to connect them to also reorganize the fragments in different ways so that you're not just repeating the same thing over and over. And I did find that in order to sketch out what I was actually doing in my own practice with this, that, just to write down that fragmenting technique in a way that is comprehensible to another person.
Yeah,
so that's what I mean.
Okay,
about,
no, that makes sense.
People, yeah, people might say, well, why? How could you write an entire book on one excerpt? I mean, the excerpt is or something, but if you actually take the thing apart the way you have to practice it carefully, and you work on each thing or each skill, that's, then you do find that it takes quite a few bars to illustrate that. So that's my answer to that. But I'm just using that as an example. The tone books are actually a little bit of a different take on Trevor Wye. I think I heard him say once that the orchestral excerpts are not etudes. And I really thought about that quite a bit, because I know that he's right. These are fragments of great works, masterworks, great works of genius, and they are just one part of something much bigger. They just happen to be the most challenging parts for our instrument. And I thought, well, what he's saying is, don't just repeat the excerpt over and over again in some way that does by rote, so to speak, in the way that one might unhealthy way, I think is what he was saying. He was saying, avoid doing that with the orchestral excerpts. And it made a lot of sense to me. And then I thought, well, if you are going to avoid doing that, then you're going to have to find some alternative ways to practice it, so you aren't just repeating the same thing over again, because that's how you get burned out and injured. So I've had that very much in mind, that idea that he said that. But then I had this crazy idea, which I kind of turned that statement around, and I said, well, are there some ways that in fact the great masterworks really are passages for practice? I wouldn't want to demean them by calling them etudes. Not that, I mean, I like etudes personally. I don't have anything against them, but I think you know what I mean. And I thought, well, for example, for years, I have been taking something like a clarinet solo, which I love, from a Brahms symphony, and writing it down for flute and learning to play it, just because it's so different. And it contains a set of challenges, which maybe are not inherent, in some of the flute passages that we practice from that symphony. So, and I have found this extremely satisfying. Over the years, I've become more and more curious about all the things that I've heard in orchestra from great colleagues. And I thought, well, in that sense, maybe the orchestral repertoire can be used for practice like an etude. So in that sense, I'm going to go against what Trevor Wye said, and I'm going to, sketch out that clarinet solo, and I'm going to use it as a tone etude for myself. And that's sort of how that tone series developed.
Very interesting. And what I'm hearing from that, and maybe I'm going to sound like an idiot, and that's okay, I'm fine with that. But what I'm hearing you say is like how, for example, that clarinet solo that you're mentioning, to me, it sounds like taking something from how maybe that solo sits very well for that instrument and then translating it over to flute, we can maybe, it doesn't sit the same on our instrument. And so because of that, it's going to teach us some new things. Is that what I'm hearing? The Straubinger Flute Company is a sought-out maker of fine flutes and pads. Located in Indianapolis, Indiana, the company celebrated their 50th anniversary in 2018. The Straubingers contribute to the community with new ideas, concepts, and raise the bar to new heights for all flutists. Straubinger flutes are known for their brilliant mechanism, beautiful tone colors, and outstanding craftsmanship. If you would like more information about Straubinger flutes, please visit their website at straubingerflutes.com.
Absolutely, especially with some of the violin passages. For example, I'm looking at the Exploring Sound Volume 1 book, which has melodies from Brahms' Fourth Symphony. I'm looking at page 11, which is a violin melody from the slow movement. And I have transcribed it here in the original key of E major, but then I've taken the further step of transposing it into several additional keys, which cover the range of the flute. And I put it in there because it is so hard. It's so incredibly difficult to play on the flute. I don't think either, for that matter. So one use of this book is that, say, today you can open this to page 11 and say, oh, I just love this melody from this movement, and I want to explore that this morning as my warm-up for my tone, and it's going to be very challenging. And, you work on it for a half hour and play it in some different keys and counter those challenges, and then try to figure out how to solve whatever issues. And so the book, I really enjoy using it that way. And then, for example, the previous passage is a famous clarinet solo, again, from the second movement. That starts on page 8. That melody, we are able to transpose into quite a few keys that work well, and then able to play the melody in additional octaves as well. So you can spend an entire morning on this if you want. And frankly, I think this melody sounds just fabulous on flute. And I think that practicing it in different ways, in different keys, experimenting with tone, with timbre, with vibrato, even working with phrasing, how to shape the melody in creative ways and stuff. I just think that is so fun. And every time that I take one of these passages and I work through the transpositions in different keys, find that when I'm done, my tone is just better. So I really wanted players to experience that, which is actually a kind of extension of Moïse's idea. Now, I have found that a number of students still are very interested in Moïse's book, Tone Development Through Interpretation, which was published quite some years ago, but that students are still using that, and professionals as well are regularly playing stuff from that book. And I thought, well, why don't we just extend that idea into the orchestral repertoire? Because it's mostly operatic stuff that he was working with to experiment with tone. And so this is just an extension of that idea. That's why I say it's about exploring your sound, but, to extend the idea, this is tone development, but it's through the orchestral repertoire.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Thank you for all that insight. It sounds, just to hear your thought process. There was a lot of thought that went into that. You said, well, there are professionals and students still using Moise. Okay, well, let me give them what they want, and then let's, extend that and elaborate on it in my own voice. And I think that's brilliant. And just all the thought that went behind it. That's amazing.
Well, I just love the orchestral repertoire so much. This morning I was sitting in orchestra and we started playing Prokofiev, Alexander Nevsky, even without the chorus this morning. I was almost moved to tears by the music. I just thought, I just can't believe that I do this and I have an opportunity to hear this great music. And so this desire to play all melodies, on the flute, it's just been growing for quite a while. But I think it was introduced to me by Moise, and that book. I went through quite a time in my career where I was trying to develop my vibrato in my sound, and one of my friends said, well, do you know this book? And they encouraged me to get it. And it was such a revelation. I spent a year with that book and a recorder in my living room. And by the time I was done with that year, I thought, wow, I really have learned a tremendous amount. But I have also found that, students like that book, but I have found that flute students do not transpose. And I think that Moise was very interested in that, in playing melodies in different octaves, but also in different keys. And this can be very difficult to transpose. So I thought, well, why don't I just go ahead and write them out for everybody? Not so difficult to do these days. About the process, my process has been very rocky, trying to do this. I started out just with manuscript paper and a pencil, scribbling out these things and transposing them from score and everything. And then I discovered Sibelius and realized that I was going to have to, if I was ever going to do anything with these ideas, I was going to have to learn Sibelius, and I'm getting better. It's a big learning curve to do Sibelius, as everyone knows. But it's been very helpful to have the assistance of the computer in trying to sketch these ideas out.
So is that one of the lessons that you learned going through this, was working with the technological side of it?
Oh man, I have learned so much. I never thought I would learn so much trying to do this, but of course, it's been kind of an exciting adventure with the technology, and I found it's difficult. I also found that I've been re-educated as to the difficulty of proofreading. And as some of our listeners may know, I've been writing articles for Flute Talk for a while, and that has been an education very much, especially in writing, but proofreading is very, very hard. And I've I've even thought, I need to find somebody who can do this for me, because if you try to proofread, you just end up reading the same mistakes over and over. So that has been pretty tough.
Yeah.
But I've learned so many other things. Just trying to so hard to put myself in the position of someone who might be interested in these ideas, these tone development ideas, and the advanced, especially the advanced students who have very high goals in terms of orchestral career and auditioning. What do I really think? I know kind of what works for me, but trying to put myself in their shoes, what works for them, and realizing, just how actually disorganized my thoughts really are, and how trying to get perspective, that maybe there's another way to do this that might work for somebody, even though maybe it doesn't, maybe it's not the greatest solution for me. So that has been very interesting. And also, just dealing with the idea that you put out some and that they actually might not work for people. People may not understand them. And crazy. And these things may not work for others because they just don't see things the way you do. And that facing that, that is a very real possibility. So having to, I think, persist as much as I ever have, in terms of saying to myself, well, you may really fail here, and more people may not only not use the books, but they might totally disagree with the ideas, and that is a very real possibility. And to hear and say, you know what, that is a real possibility, but I'm going to do it anyway. Cause I want to do it.
Yeah.
And then you realize, the importance of having, just blind hope that, and we have to have that, as musicians, we have to have blind hope, because when you walk on stage to play, you don't know if it's going to work. It's the same thing. You might fall flat on your face. You may realize that the way that you visualize things turning out is not the way they're going to turn out. And we all have to deal with that, and so it's been, and revisiting that in a sort of another format, with trying to write these books. But I will say that reception seems to have been pretty good so far, and I've gotten a lot of good comments from colleagues, and well-known flutists seem to think they're of value, and I did sort of use my Aspen students last summer as a focus group, and I gave them first drafts, and I said, you guys take these in the practice room and come back and tell me what you think. And so yeah, they had some very good comments, and but I'd say they were generally pretty well received.
Yeah. I love how you say, well, you have to have blind hope, as musicians, that's what we have to have. And the comment you made, well, I might be crazy, but I'm going to do it because why not? I'm pretty sure, Mark, that
Yeah.
the majority of the flute community is not thinking Mark Sparks is crazy. We are not thinking that at all. So you do not have to worry about that. We're thinking, if it works for Mark Sparks, I should try this out.
Well, that's right. Because really, I think flute playing did not come incredibly easy to me, and I had to go through a lot of phases to get where I am, and I've been through a lot of phases with my playing, and so I do think a lot of the things that I've put forth in these books are things that others can relate to. Of course, if everything comes easy to you and you don't have to practice too much, then these books are not for you. But if you're like me and you have to practice a lot, then I think they're pretty useful. But I don't know if we have time, but I've had this idea lately that flute players are special because we have to have more trust in ourselves. We have to have more faith in the act of flute playing, maybe than some other instrumentalists do, partially because we cannot see the air column. So our contact with when the air column, when we blow the air through the embouchure aperture, we are not contacting the vibrating element of the instrument. And that is very strange, because most other instruments, in some sense, you have to have physical contact with the vibrating element in some way, through a bow, or that you can actually see. Or if you play a reed instrument, then your lips are going to actually contact that vibrating reed. Or with the trumpet mouthpiece, for example, they're going to create that vibration through direct contact with the instrument. But the flute players are very different because we are simply holding the instrument near where we think our air column might cause the instrument to vibrate.
Yeah.
And so we have to have faith that it's actually going to happen. That when you blow the air, the flute is actually going to be set in vibration. But are you absolutely certain of that? When you go to play a note? Do you have absolute certainty that that's going to happen?
Wow.
And the answer is no.
Yeah.
You actually don't. We have to, our air column has to traverse empty space, and then contact the vibrating mechanism. And I think it takes a lot of trust, takes a lot of faith.
Yeah, I really like that. I remember a pianist once saying that he was kind of jealous that I was a woodwind player and a flutist because we have that connection to our instrument through wind. And he said the way he, as a pianist, plugs into the instrument is he kind of like something with his foot in the pedal. I think he always, that's what it was. He always has his foot on the pedal, even if he's not using it, just so he feels like he has some kind of connection or energy between him and the instrument. And I just say that because I remember him saying that to me and that getting my thoughts going, thinking, well, that's true. I do feel connected to my instrument. But when you brought that to light, saying, well, we're not, we don't have a reed in our mouth, or we don't have a mouthpiece like a brass player against our lips, we're connected, but we're not as connected as those folks are.
I think that our tone production method is akin to what some of the great blind pianists experience.
Okay.
Probably.
Okay.
Because a sighted pianist can see the key. So they can direct their hand directly onto the key, touch it, and produce the tone.
Mm.
But say that you had to play the piano, but you could not see the keys.
Mm.
So you would have to have faith that when your hand falls with intention towards E natural, that you're actually going to hit E natural.
Yeah.
You know? And I think we kind of have to have that, you know, especially with the low register of the flute. It takes a lot of faith. You have to, you know, trust that the air is actually going to go in the right place. You know, you can't just blow harder and have the note come out. So anyway, that's one of the most interesting things I think about playing the flute that I have learned. And I think that it somehow sets flute players apart, maybe. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. That's just something I've learned about playing.
Oh my gosh. What a great lesson. I love it. What I love the most about these episodes is, and I've never said this before on air, but I get to listen, you know, through the actual interview, like we're talking now. Eric will go in and do his little edits here and there, and then I get to listen to it back again when I do show notes. So I get to hear it 2 times through minimum. And I say that because I cannot wait to, in a couple days, to play back that lesson that you just said so I can hear it again in my head.
Well, that's great. I'm so glad.
Yeah. And I appreciate that because I think, you know, just your experience as being a professional musician in a solo setting or a chamber setting or an orchestral setting, and it's like wine, you know, the older we get, the more that wine is tastier. And so having that experience is priceless. And with that experience, you're able to share things like that and your insights and thoughts that are going through your brain, and sharing it with the flute community is so invaluable. And so I appreciate those comments.
Well, I mean, it's just such a privilege for me, you know, to be able to say what I think and to be able to write down what I think. And I just realize all the time how incredible that is. There are so many people who do not have these kind of opportunities, and I feel for them so much, you know. And I think one of our tasks as a musician is to be on guard all the time, that we do not take for granted. And that takes work. It really takes the work of attention to not take things for granted. Even, you know, even if you go to the competition and you fail, or you know, you're having trouble achieving your goals, or constant obstacles, or whatever, just to have the opportunity to make music is extraordinary. It's an extraordinary thing that we do. I mean, I realize there might be others also, you know, who want to write down what they think and communicate to others. And to them, I would say that persistence really is the primary thing. That sometimes, you know, sometimes it's so ridiculous to try to write down what you think, or you attempt to, you know, to communicate maybe through a flute exercise how to play something or something like that. And you look at it and you just say, no, that's, it's not it at all. And I'm going to have to rethink this altogether. This is a mess. And, you know, and then you just have to get up tomorrow, you know, and say to yourself, well, now we're just going to try it again, you know, and we're just going to do it differently. And we're going to keep doing that until we get it, you know. And I think a lot of that sort of thinking has to go into it. That's
Yeah.
the most important thing about writing anything, is that you just have to stick with it so much,
Yeah. And that's what I talked about with Dr. Kyle Dzapo. It was something about what she said about her process, and very similar to what you just said. You just have to keep at it and show up. And I'm so glad that it came from, y'all's mouth and saying that, because that's exactly one of the lessons I learned when writing either an article for a magazine or my theses, is a lot of the times you don't
Mm-hmm.
want to show up because it is a mess and it's really awful on the computer screen. And you're like, how did I ever graduate high school? I can't talk. I can't write. This is
Yeah.
ridiculous. And you're like, okay, well, and so you just have to show up. And whether you want to or not,
Yeah.
you plow through, you tweak it, you
Yeah.
get creative and rework it. And then you have this final result days, weeks, months later, and you have something to look back and be really proud of. And I think that's so important for all of us, no matter what stage you're in, is to learn that lesson. And I saw so many parallels between writing my most recent thesis to practicing. And I thought, oh my gosh, I have to, pick other flutists who've written books, because surely I know I'm not the only one who feels this way.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You're not. I think, like I said, we all are having very similar experiences. When we're younger, we tend to put people on pedestals and stuff. And, maybe the young flute players, they look at a successful flute player and they put them on a pedestal, and they say, well, that person is more talented than I am, and they're different. And I will never, be like that, or I could never do that, what they've done. How would I do that? And it's just not the way the world is, to do that. Everybody has to struggle in their lives, with all sorts of different things. I mean, we're all struggling with the same basic things. But, I say to young people who are looking up to somebody, the only productive thing about that is to realize that that they may have gone through a tremendous amount of difficulty, surmounting challenges, become as successful as they are, and I do think, in terms of our work as musicians, a lot of times you do have to just get up the next day and say, you know what, I'm going to try this again. And you fall on your face again, and then you keep doing it. And gradually, and so persistence is just so important. I never thought I was very, very talented on the flute. And it was a long time in my career, actually, before I heard somebody say, so that I could hear it, that I was talented. And when I heard that, I was so blown away, because I thought, wow, it's official. I'm talented. Somebody actually put that out there, that I'm talented.
I love it. Well, I have to back up to what you said earlier. And you said, sometimes we put these people, these flutists on pedestals. I'm going to cry, Mark, because literally I think there's a camera in the house and you're eavesdropping in on the big A's, because I'm going to cry. That's exactly what I told Eric before this interview. I said, one of the reasons why I really want to do this series is because we take for granted so much. Like, we'll see like a Mark Sparks CD on our flute studio bookshelf, and a Mark Sparks book, on our bookshelf. And we think, oh, of course. Well, yeah, he's Mark Sparks. Duh, of course. He can do anything. He's a professional flutist. And I'm like, no,
Yeah.
students need to hear that he's an actual person. He is a man. He still had to show up. He still had to probably make some mistakes. And we just take for granted
Oh my
that
gosh.
polished wrapper, wrapping of that CD and that really pretty book. And we don't see the process, and we don't see all the X's and the reds and the markings and the edits. We don't see that. And so we think, oh, I could never do that because that's Mark. I can't do that. And he's so much better. And they don't even try. And I tell my students all the time, how do you know until you try? The worst thing that could happen is someone says no, and then you can say, okay, and go down another path and try to open up another door, and keep at it. And that's what you've been saying, persistence.
Yeah, I mean, I have. That's funny that you say that. I have fallen on my face so many times in embarrassing ways, and I've tried in every aspect of my career and my personal life as well. I mean, I've just tried and failed so many times, and sometimes quite painfully so. So I think I've just been very fortunate to be able to get as far in the career as I have. I think I do feel like I've been lucky, but a lot of it's been just sort of dumb persistence. Just put your head down and go through. This kind of thing a lot of times. But yeah. I mean, we're all people. We're all we all have our strengths and weaknesses, and we all just have to try to be open and learn from each other. But I think anyone who's really determined can play the flute really well. And so yeah, I think that in these books, if people do buy them and explore them, things in there that they can easily relate to, and that will help move them down the path in ways that are not so daunting. Any of the exercises in these books are really difficult, and they're not intended to be. They're actually intended to simplify the material so that it's more approachable, it's more understandable.
Yeah, I love those words, approachable and understandable, and trying to break it down so that way it's easy to digest.
Exactly. And another thing about these books is that you can dip in and out. Maybe one day you do, for example, if you want to practice your orchestral excerpt, well, you get out your metronome and you go slow, and then you go faster and you practice your excerpt. But maybe the next day, maybe you shouldn't do the same thing again. Maybe you should open this book and just work on part of the excerpt with relevant exercises. I did find, with regard to these excerpt books, and I found this over the years of teaching, that etudes are great, and we do have amazing collection of etudes that establish that's very important. But we may still find, even after we practice our etudes, that when it comes to trying to play a short passage perfectly, that the etudes may not have prepared us quite precisely enough, because they are so general. And I've found that a set of relevant exercises, directly relevant to the material that's in that passage, between fundamental technique and drills and etudes, scales and so forth, we need that bridge to the masterworks, to the difficult passages, to help us cross over. to be able to play those things perfectly. And so I think I have learned over the years that there seems to be a need for this type of thinking. One reason that the great works are great is because they are unusual. So when a composer writes a great passage, he does it largely out of a sense of inventiveness. That there's an urge to write something different that hasn't been done quite that way before. And I think great composers are not only skilled musicians, but I think they are great inventors. And I think great composers are fascinated with the idea of doing something differently than it's been done before. Well, what that means for us as performers of those works is that we have to become fluent in the different modalities of the standard patterns that we practice, but that we have to become fluent in the variations of those, because that is why it's a masterpiece, because it's a new variation on the idea, that sort of thing.
Oh, I have goosebumps. That is brilliant.
Oh, well, no, I feel it's rather obvious.
It is. No,
I appreciate your saying so.
I feel like a ditz now. No, I think it's brilliant in the way you said it. I mean, yes. I mean, of course, a Beethoven symphony is different than a Mahler symphony, and Mendelssohn's scherzo is different than other things. And I know this, because we have different meters and time signatures and characteristics of each piece, and each piece is its own. But the way that you described it was just very beautiful, and it just, to me, was extremely insightful. And so that's why I got goosebumps.
Aha. Well, good. That's then, my technique has worked if I inspired goosebumps.
Oh, shoot. Oh, my gosh. Well, that's the first time on a Flute 360 podcast episode I have used the word ditz. You bring it out of me, Mark.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Episode 51. You are at the end. You are the last episode of the year. And then 52 will be a surprise bonus year anniversary episode. So you are the last one scheduled for the first year of Flute 360.
I am very honored.
Oh, no, trust me, the honor is all mine. I just think it was great how the timing of your publication came out, and we haven't talked in a long time. And I thought, well, this just has to happen.
Well, it's just great, really fantastic to be able to do it.
Awesome. So if you'd like to, we can do the last segment of the show titled Picks. What picks do you have for the listeners today?
Oh, let's do it. Okay. Okay. Well, these are things that I recommend.
Okay.
I recommend Southwest Airlines.
Nice.
I recommend Specialized bicycles. I recommend Hatch Chiles from Hatch, New Mexico. If you haven't checked that stuff out, check it out. I like the Noff Noff Grill in Chicago. I like, for movies, I like Cinema Paradiso. I'm just all over that movie. I love it. And then I was thinking about places that I really like. I really like Park City, Utah. And I also like the Turks and Caicos Islands.
Ooh.
So if you're looking for a beach that's not too far away, check that out. So I am thinking about Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, well, there must be two kinds of Valentines. So there are serious Valentines, and what music would be appropriate for serious Valentines? Big favorite of mine, Strauss, Four Last Songs. And then I thought, well, there's another kind of Valentines, and that's light Valentines. And the music for that would have to be Elvis, Can't Help Falling in Love with You.
Oh, of course. I love that song. I had a great experience with that song once. I went to my friend's house, Matt and Brianna's, and they sang a duet to Eric and I on ukulele. And it was beautiful. It's like one of those moments I'll cherish forever. But it was, I mean, they're both amazing singers, so that definitely helps a lot. But whenever I hear that title now, I always think of that moment.
Well, I think that's music that a lot of people can relate to, I'm sure.
Yes. Oh my gosh, those are amazing picks.
Good.
I can't top those off. I have 2 websites.
I do have a lot of things that I love, a lot of things that I like. Yeah. So it was hard to distill it down to those. Hey, let's do this again, and I'll have more.
Okay, yeah, for sure. Let me say my 2 picks real quick. They're not as flavorful as Mark's, but I'm just going to give them out anyways. Hootsuite and PicMonkey are 2 websites that I use to help me launch my podcast every week. So I thought for podcasters out there or for bloggers, they could really help launch your content. So you can check those out.
All right. Nice.
Yeah. So that's how I made your collage. Was PicMonkey. I just take pictures and change up colors and the hues and some effects, and then you've got this little kind of masterpiece, if you want to call that. I don't know if
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that collage. I love it. I'm gonna post that.
Oh, thanks. Well, thank you so much, Mark, that was a lot of M's. Thank you so much, Mark, for your time, your energy, and your talents. And I just so much had the pleasure of talking with you and listening to your teachings and your insights. And a big thanks, too, from the flute community for, from all of us, just putting in your thoughts down on paper. We so appreciate it.
Oh, well, thanks. I absolutely loved talking with you. And thank you so much for doing that. You're doing this podcast. You're really, really doing a great favor to the flute community. And thank you so much for the opportunity.
Oh, sure, Mark. Thank you very much. Today's episode is sponsored by J&K Productions. They produce all of my episodes, from adding the intro and outro music to editing the audio and all post-production needs. Contact them for your next podcast project at jkproductions.media. Thank you for listening to the Flute 360 podcast. For more information, please visit HeidiKBegay.com. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review in the iTunes store. Let's talk about flute.